Leadership is not what most people think it is. Most leaders believe that authority comes from skill, from experience, from the ability to make decisions under pressure, from charisma, from results. And yes, those things matter. But they are not the whole picture. Because there is something else. Something most leaders never think about. Something invisible, but absolutely real. Two executives can have the same qualifications, the same experience, the same strategic mind, the same communication skills. But when they walk into a room, one commands attention naturally, and the other has to work for it. One speaks, and people listen immediately. The other speaks, and people hesitate. One makes a decision, and it feels final. The other makes a decision, and it feels like it might change. Why? What creates that difference? Most people call it presence. And they are right. But presence is not a personality trait. Presence is not something you are born with. Presence is a state. And states are influenced by environment. This is what leaders miss. They focus entirely on what they do, what they say, how they think, how they execute. But they ignore where they do it. The space around a leader is not neutral. It is not decoration. It is not background. The space is structure. And structure either supports the leader or undermines the leader. Think about this. You have felt it before. You walk into certain rooms, and you feel immediately clear, focused, strong. You walk into other rooms, and something feels off. You cannot name it, but you feel slightly scattered, slightly drained, slightly less sharp. That is not coincidence. That is not mood. That is environment. And for a leader, environment is performance. Because leadership happens in space. Decisions happen in space. Authority is projected in space. Influence is felt in space. So if the space is wrong, the leadership is weakened. Not destroyed. Just weakened. And, in business, even a small weakening compounds over time. A leader who feels 5% less clear makes decisions 5% slower. A leader who feels 5% less stable hesitates 5% more often. A leader who feels 5% less supported compensates with 5% more effort. And all of that creates friction. Friction in execution. Friction in communication. Friction in results. Most leaders do not see this. They see the friction, but they blame the team, the market, the timing, the strategy. They never look at the space. And that is expensive. Let's be clear about what energy means in this context. Because the word energy is often associated with things that leaders do not respect. Mysticism, superstition, vague concepts that cannot be measured. So let's translate it into language that makes sense. Energy, in the context of leadership, is the sum of clarity, stability, presence, and authority. It is not spiritual. It is neurological. It is psychological. It is environmental. When a leader has strong energy, they think clearly. They decide confidently. They communicate with certainty. They hold the room without forcing it. That is what people feel. That is what people respond to. And all of those qualities are directly influenced by the environment the leader operates in. Here is how it works. Your brain is always scanning the environment for signals. Safety, threat, stability, chaos, support, exposure. Most of this happens below conscious awareness. You do not think about it, but your nervous system responds to it. And your nervous system determines your state. When your nervous system feels supported, you feel calm. When you feel calm, you think clearly. When you think clearly, you decide faster. When you decide faster, you project confidence. When you project confidence, people follow. That is the chain. And it starts with environment. Now, in Feng Shui, there are principles that have been studied for centuries. Flow, position, support, command, visual control. These are not mystical concepts. They are observations about how space influences human behavior and performance. And when you remove the cultural language and translate it into modern business terms, it becomes very simple. Flow means the absence of friction in movement, communication, and decision-making. Position means where the leader sits relative to the room, the door, the team, and the field of vision. Support means whether the leader feels structurally anchored or exposed. Command means whether the leader controls the space or the space controls the leader. Visual control means what the leader sees and what distracts or interrupts their focus. All of these variables are adjustable, and all of them influence leadership energy. A leader who sits in a position of command naturally projects more authority. A leader who has visual control experiences less mental noise. A leader who feels supported makes decisions with more confidence. A leader who operates in a space with clean flow executes faster. So energy is not magic. Energy is structure, and structure can be designed. Your office either amplifies your authority or quietly sabotages it. And most leaders never realize which one is happening. Because the sabotage is not dramatic. It is subtle. It accumulates. Let's start with position. Where you sit in a room determines how your nervous system interprets safety and control. If you sit with your back to the door, your brain registers exposure. You cannot see who is approaching. You cannot control the interaction. So subconsciously, you remain slightly alert. That alertness costs energy. It pulls focus. It creates a low-grade stress that you stop noticing because it becomes normal. But it is still there, and it still affects you. Now imagine the opposite. You sit with a solid wall behind you. You face the door. You see everyone who enters before they reach you. Your brain registers support and control. You relax, not visibly, neurologically. And that relaxation translates into sharper thinking, cleaner decisions, and stronger presence. This is not theory. This is how the nervous system works. A leader I will call Richard ran a private equity firm. Sharp mind, aggressive execution, strong results. But he told me something interesting. He said, every meeting feels like a fight. Even when there is no conflict, it feels like I am defending something. We looked at his office. His desk faced a wall. His back was to the door. People entered behind him. He had no warning, no visual control. His brain spent the entire day in a state of mild vigilance. So every conversation felt like an interruption. Every decision felt like a reaction. We repositioned his desk. Solid support behind him. Clear view of the entrance. Visual command of the room. 2 weeks later, he said this. I did not realize how much energy I was spending just being in that room. Now I feel like I am running the meeting instead of surviving it. That is what position does. It changes the leader's internal state. And the internal state changes everything. Next, let's talk about line of sight. What you see matters. If your workspace forces you to look at constant movement, visual clutter, or chaotic activity, your brain is processing all of that. You might think you are focused on the task, but part of your attention is always being pulled. That divided attention creates mental fatigue. And mental fatigue weakens authority. Because authority requires presence. And presence requires focus. A leader whose environment constantly distracts them will always feel slightly behind. Most leaders make the same mistakes without knowing it. And these mistakes drain leadership energy every single day. The first mistake is exposure. Many executives sit in positions that leave them exposed. Open space behind them. No structural support. Constant movement in their peripheral vision. They think this makes them accessible, collaborative, approachable, and maybe it does. But it also makes them vulnerable. Not physically, energetically. Because when you feel exposed, you compensate. You become more reactive. You monitor more. You control more. You second-guess more. That compensation looks like strong leadership. But it is actually defensive leadership. And defensive leadership is exhausting. The second mistake is visual chaos. Desks covered with papers. Screens showing 10 open tabs. Whiteboards filled with unfinished notes. Shelves packed with objects that have no clear purpose. Leaders think this shows they are busy, engaged, working hard. But what it actually shows is mental overload. Because clutter is not just physical. Clutter is cognitive. Every unresolved item in your visual field is an open loop in your brain. And open loops consume attention. So a leader surrounded by clutter is a leader with fragmented focus. And fragmented focus creates slow decisions. The third mistake is mix zones. Many offices blend everything together. Strategy happens at the same desk where emails are answered. High-level thinking happens in the same space where administrative tasks are done. Creative work mixes with execution work. The brain never gets a clear signal about what mode it should be in, so it stays in a state of constant transition. Switching costs energy, and when energy drops, leadership presence drops. The fourth mistake is lack of command position. This is the most expensive one. A leader who does not control their visual environment will always feel slightly behind. If people can approach from multiple directions, if interruptions come without warning, if the leader cannot see the room, they lose command. Not authority, command. Command is the ability to hold the space without effort. Without command, the leader has to work harder to maintain control. And that extra effort compounds. Day after day, meeting after meeting, decision after decision. The result is a leader who looks strong but feels drained. A leader who performs well but never consolidates. A leader who pushes hard but does not build momentum. And all of it traces back to environment. So what do? How do you rebuild leadership energy through space? Start with a simple diagnostic. Sit in your workspace and ask yourself these questions. When I sit here, do I feel supported or exposed? When I look up, do I see clarity or chaos? When someone enters, do I see them first or do they surprise me? When I work here, does my focus sharpen or scatter? These questions will tell you everything, because your body already knows. You have just stopped listening. Now, here are the foundational adjustments. First, stabilize your position. Move your desk so that you have solid support behind you. A wall, a stable structure, something that signals to your nervous system that you are anchored. Then, position yourself so that you face the room's main entrance. You should see people before they reach you. That gives you control. Second, simplify your field of vision. Remove everything from your desk that is not directly related to the current task. Clear the visual noise. Create space, not empty space. Clear space. Because clarity in environment creates clarity in mind. And clarity in mind creates speed in decisions. Third, create distinct zones. If possible, separate strategic work from administrative work. Have one area for high-level thinking, another for execution, another for communication. When your brain knows where each type of work happens, it shifts modes faster. And faster mode shifting means less friction. Fourth, control interruptions. Design your space so that people cannot approach you from behind or from the side without you seeing them. This is not about being distant. This is about protecting your cognitive bandwidth. Because every unexpected interruption pulls you out of flow. And flow is where leadership energy lives. Fifth, audit what you see. If your workspace forces you to look at movement, clutter, or unfinished tasks, change it. Your line of sight should support focus, not drain it. These are not cosmetic changes. These are structural changes. And structure determines state. Here is the final principle. Leadership energy is not built through effort. It is built through alignment. When your environment aligns with your role, your nervous system relaxes. When your nervous system relaxes, your thinking sharpens. When your thinking sharpens, your authority strengthens. And when your authority strengthens, people respond differently. Not because you changed, because the energy behind you changed. So if you lead people, manage decisions, or run a business, pay attention to where you do it. Because your space is either amplifying your leadership or quietly undermining it. And the difference shows up in results.